Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Excited to be here. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
Please do.
Okay. And you give me 1 second. Find the right one. There we go. Well, it's great to be here with y'all. I'll give a brief intro. I know some of you, and just got to meet some of you. But I'm Garrett. I have spent most of my career working with early stage startups, mostly software companies, as a marketing leader, and have been solo running my own thing, doing consulting for about the last 3 years. So I work with early stage founders, helping them make decisions on things like which audience should they focus on, which problem are they solving, a lot with messaging and positioning and their channel strategy. So I also run a small private Slack group for solo consultants and fractionals as well called 10x Solo. And that's been a fun project to work on. So that's a little about me and my background. Happy to connect. I dropped my LinkedIn in there, so feel free to connect. I'm pretty active there. But excited to talk with you today about something I call a 10-second clarity test and how to run it. And then what we want to do as well is for any brave souls out there, we're going to do some live feedback on some of your websites after we talk through this. We're going to do this 10-second clarity test. So as we get to it, feel free to drop your LinkedIn, or sorry, not your LinkedIn, your website URL into the chat. And if you'd like us to review it. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview here, and then we'll jump into that activity. So I thought this was interesting. A few months ago, I was reading a survey that found 100% of B2B buyers visit a vendor's website before deciding to work with them. I don't think that this was a statistically significant survey, right? But it's still, nonetheless, whether it's 90% or 100%, we all know how important your website is. It's that first touch point that people are going to really learn about what you do, right? And it's crucial for helping them understand you, trust you, choose to work with you. Your hero, which is everything above the fold when someone first gets to your website, is really should be treated like an executive summary, right? There's a lot more information that's going to happen that's going to come to them across the rest of your website and on your homepage. But I really see your hero as your executive summary. There's some key questions that visitors need to be able to answer from the hero section. This is kind of a mock-up of what I feel a good one looks like. Again, there's different variations of this, but there are some key questions kind of embedded in this that I want to walk through with you. There's really four. The first is, what is it? Someone needs to be able to land there and understand really quickly, what is this? Is it software? Is it a service? Is it an app for my phone? What is it, right? Who's it for? So what's your ICP, your ideal customer profile, right? If someone can't understand who's it for, it's hard for them to understand, is this relevant for me or not? The third is, what's the value or the big win that you promise? That's like your value proposition, right? So like, what am I going to get out of this if I sign up for this thing or I reach out to this person? And then a bonus one, this doesn't always show up in the hero, but if you can make it show up in some element, it helps a lot. What makes it different from the alternatives that I'm considering? So if you really understand who your ideal customer profile is, who you're serving, then you can speak to the what makes you different to the alternatives that they're considering. So with that, I want to walk you through a couple of examples. And then, like I said, we want to jump in to share some of your websites and talk through them in a little bit more detail. So I am going to show you a website here, just a homepage, everything above the fold. For a few seconds, I want you to take a look at it, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. So here you go. Okay. That was our 10-second test. That was roughly 10 seconds. Okay. Now, who's brave? Who can answer these questions for me from what we just saw? You can drop it in the chat. You can come off mute, but what is it? Does anyone know what it was?
I saw the
These
word community.
saw the word community. Okay. Good. Yep. What else? Anyone else see anything that stood out? I'm going to go back. I'll show you. It's
B2B, I saw.
something B2B. Yep. B2B growth, right? Kind of buried here, but they talked about it. They're a growth studio and digital community, right? Still, I'm not sure exactly what that means, right? There's probably some questions. Okay. What about who is it for? Anyone know who it's for? Hard to understand. Not sure, even if you look at it here, right? What about the main value they promise?
I see growth, but that's a
Something around
little
growth.
general.
Yeah. Still a little general, but grow your
Connections.
business. Connections. Okay. And then anything that makes it different. This is a challenging one. Okay. I'm going to show you one other one. Okay. Um, have 10 seconds to look at this, and then you can answer some of these questions for me. All right. What'd you see? Can you answer any of these questions for me?
Business analytics.
Something around analytics. Okay.
I don't know who the ICP is.
Hard to really understand. Didn't really talk about it.
Maybe Maritime Lighthouse. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Something having to do with data, right? It's something having to do with data, but not really sure what. Not really sure what makes it stand out. Okay, so you get the idea here. This is challenging to do. So I'm not making fun of these websites too, because I have done this for years and I still struggle with it for my own sites. I think many marketers do, many people do, right? It's hard to do this and do it well. I want to show you one more example and then we're going to do some of your websites because this is a really interesting example. So here you go. Okay. That was roughly 10 seconds. This is a heavy one. There's a lot of text here. This is actually a company you may have heard of. It's not a startup, it's called Cognism. They are a B2B data provider, right? And they've been around for a while. This was actually pretty interesting. Their website doesn't look like this anymore. They've done other iterations since this, but this is from a couple years ago. They did a test. They went from a very generic, high level hero section to this one, which had so much meat in it. Too much, I think, in my opinion, right? They need to trim this down a little bit. But going from the very vague to the very specific, they saw a 40% increase in conversion rate on their homepage with this version compared to their very vague one, right? So for me, even though this is too dense, right? We could improve this. This is too dense. The takeaway for me is clarity wins here, right? So how can we get more clear and answer these 4 questions on our homepage above the fold? So I would love to share some of yours. Anyone have a site that you want to drop in that we'll look at? Anyone brave? Again, we won't make fun of you too much, promise.
There were several in the chat up above.
Okay, let me scroll back and find a couple. Perfect. So I'm going to open a couple of these that I see. Okay. And if I missed yours, we can come back to it. Let me know. Okay, so this first one, I want to do this with you all. I'm just going to kind of speak out loud, right? But if we look at everything above the fold, remember our 4 questions. What is it? Who's it for? What's the value that they promise? And then the last is what makes it different from alternatives, right? So together, as we look at this, what is it? I see my eyes are drawn immediately to this. So it's some sort of cushion. I see the word cushion to relieve tension and discomfort, right? And so is that true? Whose side is this?
Garrett, that's mine. That's true.
Perfect. BJ, thank you. Okay,
First
so
thing I
that's
see is we need a better male model.
Hey, now.
Just kidding, BJ.
we got to be nicer here, Taylor. Come on. No.
I'll take any models I can get.
I will say, BJ, one thing though that could help is it's a little bit buried. Like the word cushion is a little bit buried in the middle of this sentence, right? Sometimes we add a lot of modifiers, an effective science-based cushion, but what that does is it pushes the meat of the sentence down, right? And so if you can, I would say try to highlight that even further up, right? Sometimes you can do that with like your hierarchy, maybe effective science-based or those Greek or smaller text before the word cushion, right? There's other ways you can kind of play around with that, but you want someone to see what it is pretty quickly, right? What about who it's for? Who do you think it's for? It doesn't say directly, at least that I see, but I would assume it's people like me who sit in a desk most of the day, right? That's my assumption from seeing this on the picture here. Is that accurate, BJ?
Correct.
Okay. So I might call that out specifically. Again, there's some different ways that you can do that, but can you call it out specifically? Desk workers, right?
Mhm.
Or knowledge workers or something like that, right? Whoever you're targeting there.
Yep.
Next is what's the value that it promises? Relieve tension and discomfort, right? That's what I would assume, right? It's backed by science, better position in 6 minutes a day, right? So that was kind of buried, but I think that that's something, right? Joel, did you have something? I saw your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, it seems to me that the four steps that you're outlining for a home page is very similar to what you should have on the first page of a pitch deck. It's
Yep.
almost exactly the same type of progression. And it's a matter of not having too much below the fold, which would, of course, be the second page. But um, I haven't ever approached in many of the pitches that I've been involved with, the one I'm working on right now, with that simplistic take of those four steps. Kudos.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. And the key is hierarchy here. So, BJ, I would say coming back to this real quick, I think you have a lot of the right information. You probably have too much here. That last question of differentiation, right? It's probably something to do with science based, right? I know that's in here a couple of times. This is probably the big win, better position in 6 minutes a day. I would probably try to elevate. There's probably some refinement with this to make it so that the answers to those questions pop off the page really quickly, right? There's a right
Mhm.
hierarchy here, but overall, I'd say you're hitting most of those points. So good job.
Garrett, how do you differentiate between mobile layout and desktop layout? Because it's obviously much harder to hit all that information on the mobile.
Yeah. And so I think the key is to be succinct, right? You want to be as succinct as possible while still being specific. Again, if you remember, I think of everything above the fold as your executive summary. If you're putting together a big presentation for someone, what's your executive summary slide look like? That's what you need here above the fold. You can get into more detail further down the page as they scroll, and you will on all of these questions. But I think the key is be succinct. And so the more succinct you are, the easier it works across mobile and desktop. I don't think just because it's desktop, that means that you can and should have more words on it, right? I think you should be succinct regardless of whether it's desktop or mobile. Kevin, go ahead.
Yep.
In the context of being succinct, are there certain categories among those four? Let's say, for example, I can't answer all four. Are there some that I should answer above others as priority?
Yeah, I put them in this order on purpose, and there's a reason why this one is a bonus. Sometimes differentiation needs a little bit more detail to get into. It's okay if that's not completely above the fold, but if you can, that's a big bonus, right? If you can hint at some of that differentiation above the fold. But at least someone needs to understand when they visit your site, what is it? Who's it for? And some level of what am I going to get out of it? Right? That's why those three in those order are the way that they are. So yeah, really good question. Other thoughts? Okay. Spencer, Taylor, cut me off. How much time do we got?
No, we're good. Let's keep going.
Okay. So this next one here, who was this that shared this? I'm looking back.
I'm
Raj.
Perfect. Raj. Okay,
Yes.
so as you look at Raj's page here, again, try to answer these questions with me. What is it? I see a partner in IT solutions. So I'm thinking a service provider that does something with IT. Is that accurate,
Yeah,
Raj?
yeah, that's correct one.
Okay. Who's it for?
Or like anyone, like any kind of the industry.
So I think that that's where this is probably a little bit weak, right? And I
Yeah.
think that that's where it becomes hard to market. When it's for everyone, it's for no one, right? And so the more specific you can be, one way to do that, if I could just close these out, I'll show you. A good way to do that is just to add a one line right here above your logos to describe the types of companies that you most work with. Trusted by mid-sized software companies as an example, right? You could be more specific than that, right? But that's one way to kind of hint at it. Again, if I jump back here real quick, I'll show you this this layout that I was showing you before. So again, trusted by and a description of who you serve. That's one way to kind of do that, right? Okay, so what is it? Who's it for? What's the value that it provides? As I look at this, I would say there's a couple of things here. Digital transformation, but I don't really know what that means. But that seems like it's hinting at some sort of value.
Yeah.
Next generation technologies and expertise turn strategic visions into measurable business success. So again, a little bit vague, but I think that there's some value that's inherent there. Could you be more specific with the type of success? What type of change am I going to see? What type of transformation am I going to see when I work with you, right? Those are the questions that come to mind as I look at it. And then what makes you different from alternatives? It doesn't seem like that is answered above the fold here. And maybe you don't have room for it. Maybe it doesn't make sense for your service. Maybe it's answered somewhere else. And so that's okay. But I would get tighter on those first three answers. What is it? Who's it for? What's the value, right? Other thoughts on
Okay.
this?
No, yeah, that's that way I will be passing this message to my team. Yeah, anyone is uh, bring them some value that will be more appropriate. Thank
Excellent.
you.
You bet. Spencer, we have time for one more?
Yeah, we probably have time for two more.
Okay, excellent. Whose was this?
Me, Marco.
Marco. Okay. So try and answer these questions with me again as we go through. What is it? I see document automation. I'm assuming it's some sort of software, some AI powered software for processing documents. Is that accurate?
That's kind of accurate, yeah. So it's
Okay.
intelligent document automation.
Okay.
But yeah, basically we turn semi-structured documents into data.
Okay. Tell me more about what that means. When would I use this? What's the use case behind it?
So there's a number of use cases. In fact, I mean, we have an updated version coming up, which is not online yet. So, but I was very keen on having feedback from you. Well, what it means is, so this is for other SaaS platforms, mid-sized companies in logistics, finance, turning invoices into data that can be processed downstream, document of transport, what is called bill of lading, for instance, as well as more niche type of documents. And now actually not just single documents, but dossier, in fact. So, yeah, I mean, I would have said for everyone, but I know that it's a better answer. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. It's the hardest part of clear messaging is choosing, right? But usually the more specific you get, the more clear it gets. And I would say as the company grows, it only becomes more and more difficult to be specific. So I actually think small businesses have an advantage over very large businesses. And one of the advantages is they can be more specific, especially in places like this. often, not always, but often it's better to pick your one best use case and speak to your one best use case here if there are multiple use cases. Later on the page, right, you can speak to all of those other different use cases, but what's your one best use case? What's the one type of company that is your best customer or client that you'd want to clone? And can you speak to them, right? And the more specific you are there, the more clear it becomes, right? And so I think that part of what we're seeing here, Marco, is that you have lots of use cases, right? It could be for lots of different people. The other thing I would call out is when I ask the question, what is it? The first thing I see is your partner, right? That makes me wonder, is this a service or is this a software, right? The document automation, AI powered, makes me feel like it's a software, but the partner piece makes me feel like maybe there's some sort of service that's associated with that. If that's not true, you might want to use another term there to be
It's
really
actually,
clear.
yeah. So we have some sort of dualistic. In fact, we have, I think it's called dual call to action in the updated version, and it's
Mhm.
both, in fact, the software and the service. So it's software as a service, in fact, but there's
Okay.
also an agency component to it, whereby we work with customers to come up with custom pipelines that are specific to their requirements.
Okay.
And just a question, actually, because
Yeah.
I hear this all the times about, having a well-defined ideal customer profile. But how do you trade that off with potentially running the risk of driving away customers that would still fit within your, let's say, a large set of potential customers, but because you are narrowing it down to the extent that they might think, oh, well, I mean, this is not really for me because actually I don't do A, I do B.
You know
So,
what? The one thing that I have learned is it's very hard to be too specific in marketing, especially when you're an early stage company. What I mean by that is if you consider kind of a target, you have the bullseye at the center, and then you have the outstanding rings. If you can speak to the very center of the bullseye, a very specific use case, most of the time the people who are in those outer rings can understand enough of what you do that they could see themselves with a similar use case or using a similar product or service. The risk that you run is when you try to speak to multiple use cases or groups at once, you end up speaking to no one, right? And so I would actually say there's more of a risk when you try to stay broad because the risk that you run is that no one understands who it's for or what you do because you're speaking to too many different use cases. So I have, again, it can happen, right? You do have to be careful, but I would say in the early stages, it's very rare to be so specific that you turn people away who are very good fits for what you do. I just think that that's pretty rare. And so can it happen? Sure. But I think that the opposite risk is the one you should be more concerned with, which is being too broad and no one understanding what you do, right?
thanks. I
You
appreciate
bet.
it.
You bet. Last piece here is just calling out who it's for, right? So I'm not sure who it's for. It doesn't necessarily say that. If I scroll down a little bit further, right, maybe there's something like that. But if you can get that above the fold and describe who it's for, right, that'll help clarify this in more detail.
Yeah, we have it elsewhere, but indeed, in the next version, we are going to incorporate it in the Euro section.
Excellent. Okay.
Garrett, rather than doing one more, why don't we just go into some general Q&A?
Yeah, happy
So
to.
come off mute or put it in. Let's see. I haven't been doing a good job monitoring the comments here for questions. I had a question though, and you kind of touched on it, but how narrow do we do the ICP if we're actually, I mean, I get we don't want to be for everyone, but we can go narrow, but then I also want to pick up people who are like curious or they're not sure if they're my ICP. How do I do
Yeah.
that?
Excellent question. There's different stages that startups go through. The first stage is where you're learning. You're kind of testing all of these different offers and different market segments. Eventually, though, you have to make a choice. You have to focus. And by focusing, you get momentum, right? You can't stay broad forever because you just don't have the resources to go after so many different markets, right? So you test, you learn where you have the strongest product market fit, right? Who are the healthiest customers or clients that you have? And then you focus and build momentum there. What I mean by that, though, is it doesn't mean that people who are outside of your ideal customer profile, if they come inbound to you or they come through referral and they don't require anything custom, then for sure you can close that deal. But you still want to speak to the center of the bullseye, right? And you want to be very specific about those use cases. Those secondary use cases might come to you and say, hey, I see how I could use this, even though I'm not exactly the type of customer that you serve. For sure, close them. Those might be emerging segments that you expand to over time. But it doesn't mean that you change your messaging. It doesn't mean that you build something custom for them, right? That's not what you want to do. You want to focus the majority of your time and effort proactively speaking to that center of that bullseye. So, does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
So a question from Adam was, how often should someone revisit or retest their hero section?
It depends how fast your industry is changing, but usually positioning and messaging are about the spaces you can own for the next 12 to 24 months. In some industries that change very rapidly, a lot of AI focused industries, it might be every 6 months, right? But I would say at least every year or two, you should be revisiting and making sure that those questions, who's this for? What is it? What's the value we promise? What makes it different? Are still very clear and accurate based on how you've evolved the last few years.
Let's see. Just scrolling up through the questions here. If anyone wants to come off mute, if you've got a general question,
Uh,
shoot.
Following up on Taylor's question, if I don't already have an identified ICP and I am in that stage of where it's relatively broad, but I'm trying to discover who I should be targeting for, do you have any advice for that sense of how to be vague without being overly vague?
Yeah. So truthfully, I would say there are mixed opinions on this, but you probably don't even need a website if you're at that stage, right? Like can it help? Yes, but I would say don't overthink it at that stage. Go start selling. And as you sell and satisfy customers, those trends will start to emerge, right? And you'll be able to know what to put on that homepage then after that. I'm a strong believer of sell first and sell to learn. And then you can come back and use that to magnify what you're doing with good marketing, right?
Meaning that if you're in that stage, you should still be gathering information, so to speak.
Yeah. And so again, it might be evolving and changing a lot more, a lot quicker because you just don't know who your ICP is yet. You're still looking for quote unquote product market fit, right? And so again, usually in those stages, you're doing more one-to-one selling regardless of what your model is long term. Again, I'm not sure what your product or your service is, but you might not even need a website. There are people who have grown to $1 million a year businesses without a website, right? And it's just because they're doing that one-to-one selling. Does that help, Kevin?
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
Garrett, just a suggestion. It's kind of pitch season with Utah Tech Week and Silicon Slopes coming up. There's organizations like A Million Cups, the excellent stuff that they do here, but the ability for your getting into these people's heads as they're getting ready to maybe do their very first pitch or something like that would be very valuable because you've got a very sing-song ability to be able to get the messaging out. I'd talked to Rob Bell, who Spencer and the whole team here has worked with before, and see if there's a space to get into the Salt Lake City one over there at Salt Lake City Hardware, because it would be appreciated by people that have done this before. And again, with, like I said, the pitch deck season coming up.
Excellent. Thanks, Joel. I appreciate that. I'll look into it.
Okay, we'll just make this the last question. Nitin said, could you share a few examples of homepages that do a very good job of answering your four fundamental questions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can show you a couple of examples. How much time do we have here, Spencer?
We can go probably 2 more minutes.
Let me show you. These are a couple of companies that I've worked with, right? And so this is a company that, again, there's always room for improvement. So none of this is going to be perfect, right? But again, I think if you come here, you can answer some of these questions pretty quickly. This is a custom software development company based in Minnesota. They serve Midwest manufacturing and industrial service companies, and they help them with ongoing maintenance of their custom applications or their custom software, right? And so hopefully if you see that, that's again something you can see pretty quickly by looking at their site. So again, I can happy to share out some other examples for you, but that's one I would share with you kind of off the cuff. So I do want to make sure everyone sees this though too. So if you're interested, if we didn't get to your website, these are a couple of giveaways that I'm doing just for the people that showed up today. Happy to just share a 1 to 2 minute Loom review of your homepage. If we didn't get to yours today, reach out to me. This is my email address, just Garrett at Prelude Marketing, or just connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a quick message. Send me a link to your website. I'm happy to do that for you if it would be helpful. And then I also have a tool that I'm going to share out. I'll share with Spencer and Taylor after this that we can share out with everyone. It's just a Google sheet, but it walks you through a specific process for how to do your own 10-second clarity test. So how can you go gather this information from others out there? So it's a tool to help with that. So I will send that out afterwards as well. So hopefully that has been helpful.
This is great. Thanks so much, Garrett, for coming in and sharing some wisdom with us today. And thanks for those who were brave and shared your company website. And we invite you to follow the Midday Connect on LinkedIn and sign up and register for upcoming events. We'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks.
Thank you.